We're taking you back now live to Darwin, where Cyclone Tracy's ceremony 50 years on is happening, and the Governor General Sam Mostyn is speaking.
A splendid job in acknowledging all of those dignitaries that joined today. The only thing I would say is that the fact that we are all here, I hope says to all of you, to survivors, to those of you that lost loved ones that we commemorate as well today, to those that refused to leave, that refused evacuation and stayed here and have stayed throughout, to those of you that left but decided to come back at any stage during your lives until now, and for some of you who are returning to Darwin for the very first time in 50 years, maybe for the first time to talk about what you experienced, to examine your trauma, to meet those in the suburbs that you were with during those dramatic hours and days. It says the reason we have come, that important people from around the country have come, like the Prime Minister, like the acting administrator, the Chief of Defence Force, the Chief Minister, all of us, we're here because it really matters that we take a moment to reflect on what the last 50 years means for every single one of you and what it means for the future of Darwin. Thank you, Richard, in particular. Where are you, Richard? You're right here. You all know Richard. He's your rock. Richard has not given up at any point, together with that incredible strong band of members of the Committee for Remembering Cyclone Tracy. You've done something remarkable, Richard, and for those of us you invited, how could we not say yes? How could we not spend our Christmas Day celebrating with you the important things we're going to unveil, but the stories and reflections of all of you that matter so much to all Australians. It's a real tribute to the committee and to Richard that we gather today to mark this as a nationally significant moment. It wasn't just a moment for Darwin or the Territory, although you experienced it acutely. It has become one of the most important national events that we must celebrate. I've spent some time in recent days reading the stories that are collected in Richard's book, The 50 Stories of Cyclone Tracy, and spent time at the museum experiencing at third-hand, fourth-hand, what you all experienced personally. Richard said to me that we need to remember that many have reflected intellectually on Cyclone Tracy, but now it's vital that we capture the national significance of the disaster and keep alive the stories and emotions and experiences of all of you, and not just leave it as an intellectual exercise and an examination of our past. So today, I think the emotion should run high. Today's the day when we feel the full weight of the trauma that you all felt during those early days, but the recovery that you showed and you taught the country. It's your voices, your stories, that are now the touchstone for generations that have come since, including Richard's gorgeous granddaughter, who I'm sure will lead those ceremonies with you, holding her back, Richard. The reflections remind us that the trauma and, yes, terror that you all experienced, whether it was in a bath, sitting on a toilet, up against a wall that suddenly caved in, for hours and hours dealing with that howling noise, you couldn't hear yourself think or talk to the person next to you. Everything you lived through reveals something that, whilst Australia couldn't quite get their head around it at the time, you remember those days. There was no broadcast, live broadcast. There was no Twitter or no Instagram feeds. There wasn't any radio. There wasn't even any black and white vision until several days later, when the rest of us started to appreciate what it was that you were going through. The rest of Australia was going through Christmas and Boxing Day, just hearing about this cyclone up north, having no idea what it was that you were all living through. I was a 9-year-old living in Melbourne. My army dad was about to move us from Watsonia in Victoria to Canberra. And I remember glancing at the screen from time to time and hearing people talk about you, but there was no way we knew what was happening to you until days and weeks and months afterwards. But what I've now learnt is that Darwinians and Territorians were immediately rallying. While we didn't quite understand what was happening outside Darwin, as you awoke and walked out to that terrible sight across the city, a flattened city, seeing it in daylight for the first time, you already saw the first signs of recovery offered by your neighbours, checking in on each other, sharing the food that could go off in the fridges and freezers, taking care of each other, finding the only dry clothes or blankets to wrap around you because you were freezing, something that's hard for me to understand being here in your heat, but you were freezing cold. You've been freezing all night, sitting in cold water, huddling one another. You are walking the terrifying, unfamiliar landscape of Darwin, your neighbourhood completely eviscerated, and starting that hard job of recovery. And I know that the emergency responders that then came and did a lot of that work did a powerful job for you. But it was all of you, the people who determinedly stayed and started to get ready for what was to come, that made sure that Darwin survived. You are a tenacious group, but you took care of each other, and I think you taught the country what real care and kindness looks like. And the care and kindness of the community immediately in the aftermath, in those first few days, I think has underpinned the persistence and determination that ensured that a new Darwin would emerge and would emerge quickly, and the flourishing, diverse, modern Darwin we see today, with all of you here to celebrate that and to commemorate that as much as we mourn the loss of those that didn't make it. That tells us so much about what makes you mighty today. And then to watch the incredible generosity of all Territorians wherever you were able to flock to, when you got in your cars and got yourself down those dirty, bumpy roads and found yourself at Tennant Creek or Alice Springs. I've read of what happened then, the free petrol, the food thrown at you, the billeted accommodation offered to you, families found, put back together, clothes offered. That was all happening right across the territory before we even get to the stories of the rest of the country that welcomed you all wherever you turned up, at whichever airport, whichever port, and in whatever state your family was in. The generosity of Australians did kick in, and it makes me proud to think that that's what we now rely on when we're dealing with disasters whenever they occur around the country. I am delighted to acknowledge someone important to me as your Commander-in-Chief, as well as Governor-General, but the Chief of the Defence Force, Admiral David Johnston, joins us here today. And as Richard has mentioned, he's also a survivor like you. He evacuated, I think quite traumatically really, left his dad behind, but he was the 12-year-old boy looking after his two younger sisters as they were taken to Brisbane. And I know that he's here really to commemorate that on behalf of his family and friends, but also as a tribute to the extraordinary contribution of the Australian Defence Force in the recovery of Darwin. This city, as you know, has a long special relationship with the ADF that includes the Great War and grew significantly throughout World War II, the Korean War and the Vietnam conflict. Cyclone Tracy, though, enormously reinforced and deepened the relationship that endures today and makes this a very special place for the protection of all Australians. Every service in the ADF performed a key role for you and with you, alongside you, learning from you. Air Force established a bridge from the city to evacuate the injured. Navy arrived in force to both reassure you, tell you you'd be okay, and then to commence the clean-up alongside you. Army brought the heavy equipment and workforce to scale up the recovery effort, again alongside you and with you. Today, I'd like to recognise all those Defence Force people who came and supported Darwin during and after Cyclone Tracy. That relationship forged in that time has been forever the mark of the relationship with those that protect us, and I hope that was how you felt it when they all turned up, but listened to you and worked alongside you to recover. They're an amazing force, and I'm very proud to see that they took the learnings of the work here right across the country in every disaster they now turn up at. So now we soon move to look at this wonderful commemoration that Tetchy has given us, a memorial that is so special. It does two things. It reminds us through the twisted steel of what it was that many of the survivors woke up to and saw of your city on that morning, Christmas morning, 1974. But then the frangipanis, the gorgeous flower of Darwin, and all the hope, the perfume, the beauty that sits in those flowers, and the way we will memorialise this time that you came through and taught the country what it means to be to have care, to be kind, to take care of each other, but always, always to recover and rebuild and think about the future. What I've learnt by being in the Territory just the last few days, listening to the stories, getting to know Richard, hearing more about what you've all endured, your survival is a story of love. It's a story of love for each other, of coming back, of being here for one another, and the fact that so many of you turned out today just to spend some time thinking about who was lost, but what was gained in the strength of this city, the endurance. I'm not going to say resilience, because I think actually we overuse that word. I think it's actually that you're in recovery, you've recovered well, you teach the country what it means for us to treat each other well. Those lessons will endure, and I hope the nation's focus this Christmas Day is all on Darwin, paying attention to the stories that come from here, and a little bit of reflection on what says so much strength, what says so much of the strength of the Australian character. which I think is all about love and care and kindness for one another. For those of you that today is a hard day, do take care of yourself. For those survivors that are celebrating getting back together with people you haven't seen for a long time, I hope it's a joyful time. And Richard, to you and everyone involved in getting us here and making sure we take the time to remember the most important national events, of which this is one, thank you. You've brought us to you, and we're going to take you to the country and the world. Thank you, everybody, and take good care.